Hey everyone, how's it going? Happy holidays coming up here. Charles is with us. I also have Lloyd, Radio Astro, is with me here as well. He's been in some of the recent Intersect meetings, so I'm going to hear from Lloyd on that. Charles, how you doing, brother? Happy holidays. I'm not getting the audio. Lloyd, do a radio check with me.
I will do a radio check. Hey, Rick, can you hear me?
I hear you loud and clear. Can you hear Charles?
I did not hear Charles.
Okay, all right. Maybe it's that Android thing that the Twitter Spaces was having. Maybe I don't know, phone reboot or something in order to do it. But while we get the audio sorted out, there's a few stats I was going to go over. It's been a great year for Cardano. Charles, I just heard your audio come on.
Can you guys hear me now?
I can hear you now.
We hear you now.
All right, all right. Well, first off, thank you for having me on, Uncle Rick.
Hey, you're welcome. Thanks for joining us here, Charles. I appreciate it. I know you got a busy day, but you always take the time to get out here and talk to people, and I love that about you, man. I'm happy with the holidays. You know, allegedly we've had a bear market for the last year or something like that, but I've been so busy with stuff that it just doesn't seem like it because ever since is the early meetings last year in Longmont, followed by in Denver, then we had CNFT Con, we had Rare Bloom, we had the event in Dubai, multiple meetings. It was crazy. It was a crazy year, and I love it. I just can't get enough of it. And there's so much going on. From last week's stats reports, 152 projects launched on Cardano, 81,000 token policies, 6,200 Plutus V1 scripts, 4,900, almost 5,000 Plutus V2 scripts. And to date, not just in the last year in 2023, but to date, and there's so many apps and dApps to play with and so many different groups of people to interact with. I'm ecstatic. If you could tell, I'm excited. I hope everybody's excited.
It's an incredible year when you really think about it. It's also important that you understand, last year, we didn't even have smart contracts for the bulk of the year. And it really takes about 3 to 7 years for that model to mature and build itself out. And so we're actually just on the uptrend with smart contracts as they grow. And we had Plutus V2 really come into its own. And there's just a lot of really cool things that are starting to click in and snip in. And it's just amazing to see the vibrance and health of the network. And that's reflected by the TVL. It's reflected by the strength of the dApps, especially these second generation Cardano dApps that are coming. And it's also reflected by the quality of feedback that we're getting from the community on how to upgrade and evolve Cardano and how many community SIPs have been written and just the level of commentary on all SIPs and all aspects of the design. So we're really coming into our best year ever next year.
It is, and seeing everybody put in these different SIP proposals and getting them approved in order to advance Cardano is also pretty amazing. There's been so much work getting done, and there's some things that we were going to touch on today. There's a recent Cardano node release. It's filled with P2P improvements. There's people having conversations about they want to increase block size, but we got to be careful about that because if you increase it too quickly or too large too quickly, the blocks start stepping on each other and having hype battles. So we're monitoring the chain performance. We got Marcus Guffler over there doing some really in-depth chain analysis on the mainnet. Voltaire and Sancho Net go hand in hand. The Sancho Net, the technical side is getting ironed out. Lots of upgrades occurred on Sancho Net recently, and a lot of people meetings with Voltaire intersect in the MBO. So plenty of stuff to do to keep everybody busy, and I'm really enjoying it. So one of the recent things that came out was the 872 version of the node. It has P2P improvements. There's a lot of improvements and enhancements in how that portion of the Cardano network works. And what I'm thinking is, what should we do moving forward before we say, all right, increase the block size? Because people want recently in the last week, a lot of people talking about they want better throughput. They want a better user experience. We're going to be onboarding millions of more users over time. Right now, chain load is at 60%. 61% over the last 24 hours, and I've been using it. It's working well. And so, what do you think, Charles, about what should we be looking at, and thinking about before we decide to increase both block size or memory unit size? The CPU units, those are also important.
Yeah, you know what's so great about the past is that everybody always hated us because they're like, "Hey, IO, you guys go figure out what network parameters, no matter what you set them at, how quickly you move. There's always somebody who gets pissed off." And what makes me so excited about 2024 is that the right group of people are actually in the room to make that decision for the first time ever. With Intersect in this concept of parameter committees and groups of people from the community there's over 1,000 members of Intersect now. There's a representative sample of the different constituencies, whether you be an NFT issuer or a DEX, or you be, just an everyday user of Cardano. There's enough people there to be in the room, have that discussion, and decide where it should go. The magic of Cardano is that it's designed to operate equally well, whether you're at 100% load or zero load. The system is designed to fail gracefully, and the system is designed to take long periods of high degrees of stress. And we've been here before, right after smart contracts launched, and we were bombarded. And the Sunday swap days, you guys remember that? Cardano didn't fail, it didn't break, it didn't shut down. It just basically slows down a little bit, but the network runs under that load. And it's a testament to how it's designed and where we're at. In terms of actual theoretical things, probably we could stand for a larger block size, over 100 kilobytes, and mem units could definitely go up. There's enough margin of error that exists there that these things comfortably could be pushed here or there, but there's always trade-offs that exist. But then there's also a discussion about optimization and improving the overall design of the system. So this was the whole input endorsers agenda of saying, hey, instead of having a limited window of time for a computational budget, which is what we currently have, why can't we do asynchronous continuous computation in the system? And then also, is there any way that we could do parallel processing of blocks, so that it's not just this linear question of, well, should it be X kilobytes or Y kilobytes, but rather, can we process many at the same time? So you actually kind of get a natural flow, and the limiting factor becomes the physical network connections. So the overall bandwidth available to the system as a whole. So we did a lot of really good work in 2022 about understanding what's possible with Laos and input endorsers. And all throughout 2023, a small team was kind of working on that. I think the time is starting to come to really pursue that aggressively. One thing I wanted to do in 2023 was get an understanding of input endorsers and this parallelism of the system within two contexts. One was fast finality. It was really important that we understood how we achieve fast finality inside the system. So how does one layer a finality gadget, which led to Ouroboros Paris, and there's been some phenomenal work that's been done there. And then the other context was cross-chain communication, kind of a concept of hybrid dApps, where you have layer twos and you have partner chains, and these things are doing a lot of stuff. And I wanted to get a better understanding of the message patterns and how state would be managed between these different systems, because that's another big piece to the puzzle. Because those different systems carry radically different designs, transaction semantics, and these types of things. So we achieved that in 2023. That was a big research win where a lot of really good ideas have been put on the table. And now I think it's time to go to Well-Typed and talk to old Duncan Coots, the wizard, and tell him and PNSOL and these other guys, all right, guys, get to work and start doing some hardcore modeling and testing through Intersect and the structure that's there. And let's really understand how we're going to get input endorsers into the system. And in the meantime, the community can come together, and from SPOs to other people. And I think you guys can, as soon as SIP 1694 gets in, if it gets in, can start really monitoring those parameters on a pretty regular basis. And it becomes something every DREP talks about, every week. And there'll be a lot more responsiveness to all system parameters, not just block size and these things, but also min fees and these things.
Yeah, and I've learned a lot about that, Charles, from listening to people like Marcus Guffler and Pi Landingham from Sunday Swap on block propagation and how the network is performing and what the developers need. I listened to Andrew Westberg, Adam Dean, and I think that's going to help DREPs in the future to say who are these trusted community members who look at these parameters hard. They have experience in dealing with the blockchain and the user experience to better understand what network parameter changes should be made, right? And these could be made among community members that people have learned to trust, who've been working on this kind of stuff. And then, it's interesting that you mentioned Duncan Coots. He was one of the first guys I thought of when I was thinking about the user feedback and user experience. That's what a lot of people are talking about. The user experience is actually pretty good depending on which dApp you use. Some of them handle it a little better than others when the chain is under load. Some of them are still really quick. I play with Dex Hunter, Sunday Swap, a bunch of different dexes all the time, respond pretty quick. Some of the things run into a little bit of contention. That's all fine to be expected. But I remember Duncan Coots telling us like at Plutus Fest like 5 years ago in 2018 around this time of year. As a matter of fact, it was about 5 years today we did Plutus Fest. And he said something to the effect where as the transaction load on a network increases, you want to at least make sure you push back the feedback to the user that the network's under load, something to that effect. And he also did a slide where these, as Plutus upgraded, you would have these different Plutus variants and the chain would understand the older versions as opposed to the newer versions. And I'm really glad to see all of that coming to reality. And we got brilliant guys like Duncan working on it. I haven't talked to him in a while. I'd really like to talk to him again too.
Oh, he's still around. He's been doing a lot of stuff. He had a kid. So it's like there's everybody just they get older and they age and these things. But well typed is still a pivotal component, as is PNSOL, and all the old people are still floating around in one place or another in orbit, and they take different roles over time. But he's really a domain expert in network theory and consensus, and where he's most valuable is imagining how to architect these things in a way where they fail gracefully and they are able to do what's on the label. So you don't end up with Solana style situations where the network has to stop and reset, or you have a ton of waste products as a byproduct of operating the consensus. There's just a lot of moving pieces that are hidden from the mainstream Cardano user that were meticulously thought about by Duncan and his team over a multi-year period. And it's probably some of the best engineering work I think that's ever been done in the industry. So it's incredibly important, and they're definitely there, as is Twig. And Twig is right now implementing Ouroboros Genesis, and our hope is to see that on pre-prod by April if we can get there, and they're working like hell for it. And then my hope is to roll them immediately over into VRF improvements in Ouroboros Paris. So there's a lot of parallelism inside the development pipeline now, where Galois working and Welltype's working and Twig's working, and they're working on different but equally important things to the network. One other caveat is that we as a community, we have to understand that some things are the business of the network and some things are good hygiene of the dApps that run on the network. So if your dApp is not running fast enough, what you shouldn't do is, and I'm not going to name names, but there were certain dApp developers that came and said, oh, we should increase the size of blocks to a megabyte because we think that that's the only way that Cardano can be competitive. It's like, what the fuck are you saying? What you should do instead is say, okay, how can I make my dApp better? Maybe you upgrade to Plutus V2. Maybe you use Aiken. Maybe you change the way you handle your design so you're more conservative in how you batch transactions, or you take better use of UTXO. Oxo is really taking very good use of UTXO as an example. Some first generation dApps really aren't. So if you get a bad user experience with a dApp, instead of naively just saying, oh, this is Cardano's fault, Cardano's broken, maybe it's the case that the dApp was poorly designed, and then that's why that user experience isn't where it needs to be. So that's the beauty of having Intersect around, is that it kind of forces that conversation in both directions and asking ourselves, all right, what is truly a network level concern, and what is the roadmap to make Cardano better, faster, cheaper, and be the best place forever for people to build an infrastructure on? And then what's a best practice that we as a community should push on to dApps and say that if they're properly designed, they follow that best practice to ensure they're good citizens of utilizing the resources of Cardano, but then also that they have a good user experience as well.
Yeah, and I always used an analogy, and it's interesting. I saw Aaron from Midnight CEO, use a similar analogy, where if you're building a Formula One race car to run on a Formula One racetrack, you build the car for the racetrack that it runs on. That would be like building the dApp for the blockchain that it runs on. If you're going to have a dirt track race, well, you might want to use a Humvee or a dirt bike, right? But the Formula One car, although it's extremely fast, it's not going to run very well on a dirt track. So you got to design what it is you're trying to do for the track you're running on. And one thing I never understood is I don't know anyone who actually needs a flash loan unless you're doing something that's probably considered degenerate, which I'm okay with. But I just don't. I never had the need for a flash loan. It just wasn't there.
Yeah, and even if you do, it's like that's the reason Hydra exists, and that's the reason partner chains exist, because the whole point of those types of paradigms is that you can start doing unsafe, non-deterministic things in special purpose buckets, which are interoperable and connected to the main network, but they're specifically for that type of behavior. These event-oriented things that are very different from a traditional blockchain model. What really bothers me is when one developer comes and says, well, just because your chain doesn't support 100% of everything I have, it somehow is a failed project. It's like, guys, no, you're going to get with any ecosystem, whether it be Linux or Windows or iOS or Android, like 70-80% of what you want if it's a good ecosystem. And then you, as a developer, are going to have to figure out that other 20%. That's kind of your job. And so, as an ecosystem, we do have to think around how do we build those buckets where people can have bespoke functionality. And that's one of the points of the Hydra program, and that's one of the points of evolutions of Plutus. Like, for example, Plutus V3 is adding BLS support, and that's not just, hey, we have a better signature scheme. That's also things like, okay, roll-ups and zero-knowledge proofs and all kinds of things. It actually opens up a whole world of possibilities. But you'll notice that we didn't deploy along with it all canonical roll-up and zero-knowledge proof system. You're going to have to build that for your application, and there's already several projects on Cardano that are pursuing it. So, we have to really start ring fencing what is a community priority, what is a protocol level priority, what's a DApp specific priority. And yes, absolutely, if we really want to push in a certain direction, make it easy, well, that's the point of Catalyst, and that's the broader point of the Cardano treasury. We can make it an economic priority and really push in that direction. And obviously, we're still around and we're still building these types of things. But we're just one of many companies now pursuing these ends.
Yeah, and that brings us to Voltaire and Intersect, and that's also why I asked Lloyd to come in here as well. Is you have the whole community of people thinking on stuff, and you have not any one of us is as smart as all of us. And so, how do you bring that all together? And so there have been multiple streams going in parallel with the technical side of building out Voltaire on SanchoNet and getting the technical parts, software parts working. And there's the people part with the MBO. So you have the higher level MBO Intersect. Then you have the subcommittees such as the Civics Committee and the Parameter Committee. And then you have the subcommittees below that, one that I'm working on, which is the working group for the guardrails. And then Lloyd has attended the recent meetings. Lloyd, what'd you get today? What'd you get from the recent meetings with Voltaire that you've been participating?
Hey,
You're,
Rick,
you're on mute.
thanks. Yeah, I just had to find the unmute button there. So the meeting today was actually around ecosystem mapping, right? Which we're starting to work on. What really exists in the space, what's already here, what needs to be built. We're writing maps to try to describe things so we can the idea is to get people up to speed faster, so that they know what needs to be worked on, so they know where the gaps are, where the problems are. Kind of to Charles's point that he just made, one of the things that I've said in the last couple of meetings is that we don't want to have a perfect scenario where somebody's 100% happy. What we actually want is everybody to have given up a little something so that we all work together and we all have, kind of a better use of the space that represents all of our values together, what our shared path is. And it's just great to hear Charles say that as well, that's the, even from a technical perspective and from the people perspective, that's kind of the aim, is to get everybody sort of 80% there, 80% happy.
Glad you're thinking about that kind of stuff because the questions will come up through the Voltaire. What do we build next, right? Let's say there's 5 proposals on the table. There's only so much money in the budget. What do people think should be built or marketed or funded next in order to build out Cardano even further? So it's good to hear people are
Absolutely.
making that kind of progress.
Well, and what's great is that there's so many members of the community from so many diverse backgrounds that are being a part of these working groups. You're there. We've got other stake pool operators. We've got developers. We've got humanitarians and activists. So we've got this entire group of just brilliant minds working and thinking on what does this mean to me, and then we're coming together in these working groups and having discussions and coming up with documents and moving it forward. And that's right now, if anybody tells me that they don't feel heard, the first thing I ask them is, are you a member of Intersect? That is the very first question I ask them. If you don't feel heard in the Cardano ecosystem, join Intersect and start being a part of the solution, right? And so far, nobody's told me no. And so far, when I've asked, nobody's been turned down for any job that they've been willing to take on in Intersect. So I can't yet say that something's not working, because if it's not working right now, it's only because we don't have enough people that have gone ahead, rolled their sleeves up, and gotten to work.
That's good to hear so many people.
And I just want to add something to that. We brought in some very experienced people as advisors to kind of help Intersect grow and evolve. For example, Salona Bonewald is a consultant we brought in from IEEE and Hyperledger, and she's been at the Linux Foundation a long time and knows an enormous amount of stuff about what makes a good open source program and project and the balance of different members and how to do exactly what Lloyd's talking about, where you have a discontent of compromise, where not everybody's going to get everything, but at least they get enough where it's a functional system. And one of I kind of have three major goals that I'd love to see Intersect execute on next year. One is that at the board level, the members got to elect some board members, and so that we get a proper board level representation of the members of the community. And so there's a whole governance process and program that's got to be put together to get that done. And that is directly connected to the level of engagement, as Lloyd is mentioning, of the users themselves. The people of Intersect, you got to show up, got to be there, you could be in the meetings, commit, and elect people, good people. And so there's a democratic component to that. The second is that Intersect really has to take over in an appropriate way the Cardano product function. So what's happened is that all the code is moving over. Intersect has control of the repos, the get access, these types of things, and that's a big program, and it'll be done in a reasonable time, weeks and months, not years. And during that transition, the product backlog that was put together previously, which involves Voltaire and partner chains and these things, that's being handed over as kind of a stub. But there is an open question of, well, what is the next priority? So Intersect is one of the organs, not the only one, but an organ where that is discussed as from a product to product viewpoint. And the people who serve in those working groups are basically going to be the ones who start filling out that product priority. And the engineers are the ones who go and execute that, but they execute at the behest of the backlog. So it's not the case that some engineering company in the middle of nowhere is going to say, well, I disagree with that, I'm just going to go do my own thing. If they're working with the Dev Trust and Intersect, whatever the backlog is, they're going to go do that, and they're going to go implement that. So, if we say, hey, after Ouroboros Paris, we get these finality things in, we're going to go full tier as an ecosystem into input endorsers and go like a death march and push as hard as we can. Well, that's the priority. If the community pivots and says, we really want to go back to first principles and add a dramatic amount of functionality into untyped Plutus core and add some boxes for non-determinism and hooks for accounts and do account abstraction, these things really just supercharge the smart contract side of things, well, that's the priority. You see, that's what gets decided at Intersect and its assigns and that's the community coming together. And ideally that prioritization comes from real life use cases. It's not an abstract concept of, oh, well, I think it might be sexy that we have this feature. It's like, I want to go issue 10,000 NFTs and it's too expensive. Or I'm running a DEX and I'm running to the following 12 problems. Or I want to do this on-chain voting thing. Or I'm trying to build a DAO and I got about 70% of the way there. And the other 30% I just can't figure out how to do without this missing essential feature, whatever it might be. And then it gets discussed, haggled, and turned into SIPs. And this is the mechanism upon which it becomes a priority, not the well, I asked and they said no, or this type of thing. So it really is a two-way relationship, and it's going to help us, kind of get where we need to go. The other thing is it helps us with business intelligence, where we, for the first time ever as an ecosystem, really need to look at other ecosystems. I've been trying to do this, like with Sean Ford coming in from Algorand, and Iran and Obermeyer and others coming in from the Polkadot ecosystem. But it turns out that like other ecosystems do great work too, and they think differently, and they sometimes value things a little differently. But a lot of that stuff from those other ecosystems could be of tremendous benefit to Cardano, but it has to be harnessed, translated, and captured in the right way. So when you have a bucket like Intersect, what that allows you to do is to not only have Cardano community members, but within those working groups, you could have people from other ecosystems in them and say, hey, let's talk interoperability. For example, we're going to have a summit here with Ethereum, of all people. I think Vitalik and I are going to be together in third week of January, and we're going to be talking about quantum computing and some of the things that are in our research agenda for quantum, and some of the things that are their research agenda for quantum. And that's taking place at the University of Edinburgh the third week of January. It's a one-day summit. I think it's like QCon or something. I'll find a link for you guys. But anyway, that's just an example of where we're starting to actually talk to people, and we don't always have to agree or have the same philosophies. But when you have these neutral members-based organizations, it's just as easy to have our own community talk as it is to have other communities come and be represented. And then suddenly their roadmaps are viewed in comparison with our roadmaps, and we find out we have a lot more in common than we have not in common. And we start having more holistic views about how to get things to work together. And ultimately, I think that makes us such a stronger ecosystem.
Charles, if you don't mind, I'm going to interject here because it's interesting. I just got back from Spark 23, which is the Fireblocks conference, because our team's working on something on the Fireblocks ecosystem. And, what I really learned while I was there was that their grasp of regulatory concerns and their grasp of dealing with traditional finance is amazing. Like they're built that way, though. Fireblocks is built on that principle of being the regulated blockchain, and then I saw that their grasp on governance was maybe like limited, but limited in the respect that they really were only looking for governance like from a corporate level. So there's so much we can learn from each other. Like I do see in our space that maybe we don't have a really heavy grasp on kind of that traditional world finance stuff in a lot of spaces. And they seem to have it just in droves. But what we know about governance and about community building and that sort of stuff, they could learn so much. And so it is interesting. That was exactly my experience when I was there in Tulum last week.
Following up on what Lloyd said is that, okay, sometimes people inadvertently call Charles the CEO of Cardano. There is no CEO of Cardano. Adam has Saturdays covered. I signed up for Tuesdays for the month of December. Cardano does not have a CEO. And sometimes people say, well, where's the partnership? And here's a perfect example. Lloyd and his team, they're working with Fireblocks. Over on Drip Drops, they're working with Google, right? They put this stuff out, but no one makes a big deal out of it. And in some blockchains or organizations, they would say X chain has a partnership with Google. No, that's not how it works. All these different developer teams that we have out there, all these different entrepreneur teams, they're building the partnerships with the other chains. Hey, Cardano's connected with Fireblocks folks and Google folks. It's great stuff. I'll get some people's questions here in a bit. Charles, you got any follow up on that?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we see the same thing when people talk about, oh, how do we get Circle to come on in and oh, Charles, you should pay $10 million and go do that. The other thing about Intersect that's really powerful, in addition to the product roadmap, is a place for people to talk about the budget of Cardano. So the thing is that Cardano, there was a lot of foresight in putting aside a rainy day fund, a sovereign wealth fund of Cardano. It's its own nation state. It's got a sovereign wealth fund. I just got back from Abu Dhabi and Dubai, and if you 100-mile radius, there's $5 trillion, and these guys are building 40 skyscrapers a year. It's crazy what you can do when you have a sovereign wealth fund. Okay, and we got one as an ecosystem. But the thing is, until 1694 comes in, unless it does, we don't get to touch that sovereign wealth fund. Well, now that we do, next year, Intersect can actually bring the community together and they can actually talk about the budget of Cardano as an ecosystem, just like a government talks about its budget. And like any government, it says how much do we spend on healthcare and how much do we spend on national defense. Well, analogously, the people of Cardano can come together and say, how much should we spend on development? How much should we spend on ecosystem growth and partnerships? How much should we spend on marketing? How much should we spend on institutions like Intersect itself or other institutions? How much should we spend on education? These types of things. Well, once that's been decided, you then decide, how do we hold people accountable? What type of oversight do we want to see? What type of ROI as an ecosystem do we want to have on these grants that we push through to facilitate these types of things? So if you think that the highest priority is that we have a tier one stablecoin like a Tether or a Circle, well, maybe we as an ecosystem should set aside the resources to do that. And instead of hoping and waiting that some custodian's going to come around and figure it out, what Intersect does and Voltaire does is it empowers you to voice yourself in that way. And you become a D-Rep or tell your D-Rep, hey, this is important to me. I think it's absolutely essential for the growth of DeFi in our ecosystem that we have this capability, whatever it might be. And I think it's worthwhile spending X million dollars, for example, to go and pursue that. But what's nice about this process is that it's democratic and that anybody can come. Let's say Lloyd's talking to Fireblocks and they come by and say, we want to go all in on Cardano, but we need $3 million of non-recurring engineering to go and do this. But if we do it, it's going to open it up and have all these amazing capabilities for every dApp developer in Cardano ecosystem. But is that a worthwhile expense? Well, that's something he can bring to the table and discuss it with the rest of the people. And if it turns out that the ecosystem really wants to do that, it could be a budget proposal. And then it gets approved by the D-Reps and we do it. And it's funded and it's there. Just like any government where one senator will say, hey, I really think them kids in Louisiana that we really need a new school out here in Orleans. And we have to decide, is this really something we want to do? So there's pros and cons, but I think it's just a much better way of doing things because it's done in an open process, it's transparent, and it's connected to a broader philosophy and strategy. Because a budget is always what we really prioritize. It's very easy for people to say, hey, I support you. But then when you actually have a budget, what you're actually saying is, I support you X dollars at the end of the day. Like, for example, our current US government, they say we support federal education, K through 12 education. But when you actually look at the budget for it, it's about $66 billion that they spent in 2023. They spent twice as much money funding a proxy war in Ukraine. Now, whether you agree with that war or not, what the decision makers in Washington, D.C. basically told the American people is that the education of every K through 12 child at the federal level in the United States is worth about 0.5 Zelenskys. That's what they basically told the American people. So that's a data point for how they value things, who they value, and who's really in charge. So when you're building the Cardano budget, you're really explicitly saying that. Is it new features and capabilities? Is it marketing and growth? Is it upskilling the people around us? Is it partnerships? Is it new geographies? Is it that we have an institution deficit and we need more diversity in the institution? Is it blue ocean, new research and development? Do we need more papers? What exactly is the priority? And now everybody gets to come together, have that discussion. It converges to a single budget, a single number. That sovereign wealth fund that we have opens up, and we can start actually making disbursements. And I think it's going to supercharge the ecosystem, and it's going to make us so much more resilient than all of the other third generation cryptocurrencies.
Yep, it certainly will. I'm going to go to Ed and Adam Rush here in just a bit. And that is something, Charles, that we discussed on the working group that I'm on with Adam Rush and Lloyd is how do we come up with a mechanism that allows the D-Reps to set a budget? And that's kind of like the conversation we've been having. And it's really difficult to figure it out, but I think we're getting in the right direction. Let's go to Ed and then Adam. Ed, what do you got? Jump in on the conversation, man. What you got going on?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to bring up stuff. Can you guys hear me okay? All right.
Yep.
Just checking
Yep.
first. Okay. I was actually just going to piggyback off what Charles was saying. I was talking with Damon from Charlie 3. And one of the issues now that we're seeing a lot more projects come online and grow in prominence, certainly it'll happen in the bull market, certainly, is that one issue is getting listed on these major centralized exchanges. And it's not just cost, although that's part of it, which speaks to what Charles was talking about in terms of the fund. I couldn't agree more. I co-sign everything he just said. This is one such issue you could bring up there. And Damon said he's working with the Cardano Foundation, but I would presume that they would be part of this intersect conversation as well, although you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, because they are a different entity. But one of the issues that was made clear to him was programmability. That basically these major centralized exchanges, which are big on ramps and off ramps for a lot of people, is they don't want to deal with the hassle of programming it unless the volumes are super, super, super high, which isn't realistic for every project, obviously, in any ecosystem. So the ease of programmability, initiating Cardano stuff on there, and I said, well, they put ADA on there, so surely they can do it. Apparently that's not the case. That's the feedback that they're getting. And go ahead, Charles.
Yeah, I think that's a cop out, because the thing is, if you've listed ADA, then Cardano native assets should be rather straightforward, because that's built-in support on the protocol. And I do believe that there does need to be a slightly more aggressive approach with the Cardano Foundation in particular, because they've taken it upon themselves to kind of work in that direction, to discuss in not a particular token, but in general, how we can get Cardano native assets as a feature supported. Because when you list Ethereum, you also list the ERC20 standard. And for many of these exchanges, the way they've constructed things, it's rather turnkey. So I just don't understand why that would be a difficult thing with Rosetta, for example, or any of these other listing interfaces to kind of get it there. And at the intersect level, I do believe that we need to work with a lot of partners, including the foundation, and start getting a little bit more aggressive, about how do we get that there. The other thing is that the winners and losers are changing. So Binance has taken recently a very big hit, and there's new entrants like M2, for example, that are coming. So I do believe that it's definitely, if the working group was just killing it, pushing hard, that it would definitely be possible to have 3 to 5 exchanges become very friendly to Cardano native assets, meaning that there's a nice path there. But generally speaking, these days in 2023, how you get listed is, the first thing is that you have some evidence of liquidity and demand. And that evidence signal usually comes from DEXs. So you get a lot of DEX data that shows, hey, there's a boatload of turning over and things that are happening. And then the exchange says, well, if we listed it, we can do a calculation and look how much money we could make from that. So that's kind of the first major thing that has to happen. One of the problems we've had is that there's a lot of DeFi aggregators that don't track Cardano and our DEX volume and these types of things. And it's been a constant bugbear of ours as an ecosystem, where they say it's ghost chain, there's nothing going on there. We're like, look at all this stuff that's happening. They say, oh, we weren't even tracking it. They didn't even look at our TVL. They actually just registered as a 0 TVL. So some of these exchanges, there's just an education problem where they're not even aware that there's actually a lot of activity with Cardano native assets. And that's an example of a marketing and education thing that can be done. There's certainly some technology things that can be done, where a lot of the pre-development work can be done to upgrade and modernize these systems like Rosetta to make sure that native assets are well supported. And then I think it's also just, these projects have to get to a certain level of maturity to get listed. And usually that is around a $500 million market cap, and a consistent a turnaround of tens of millions of trading on a daily basis. That's generally where you need to be at to be able to get on a tier 2 or tier 1 exchange. The other factor, guys, is that regardless of who you are, big player, small player, this environment is probably one of the worst regulatory environments for liquidity with tokens. And the recent litigation has created over a degree of conservatism with the tier 1 exchanges. And that is another confounding factor. But then you have to ask yourself, if you're building a new project and DEXs are getting really good and you're getting good liquidity and turnaround there, is it really a super high priority being on Binance or CoinDesk or Coinbase or these types of things? Do you need that kind of liquidity? Do you need that kind of turnaround every single day and to be in that model? maybe it is better to live on a DEX side. And I think because of the attacks on the exchanges and the changes with Binance, we're going to see a huge surge in DEX usage in 2024, and that might be sufficient to be a viable bridge. But the point of something like Intersect is this is the conversation that needs to be had at a community level, and this is a conversation that needs to be had on a blockchain to blockchain level. We should be talking to the Polkadot people because they have 190 parachains. We should be talking to the Cosmos people. We should be talking to the Algorand people. We should be talking to everybody that's in the DApp and DeFi market and say, hey, we're all, as an ecosystem, kind of being screwed by exchanges, and they're acting as gatekeepers for decentralization, and that should not happen. So how does we as an ecosystem do a better job? And then I think the outcome of that conversation will be getting a much more graceful curve between the listed and the unlisted.
I think just as a quick follow-up, Charles, I think part of the allure of those exchanges is the on and off ramp, right? Especially for the US. And there's not a lot of that for the DEX ecosystem. So I think that's why there's an insistence on getting listed for places like that.
Yeah, but if you can go to Bitcoin or to Tether, you're one step removed from on and off at that point. There's plenty of services. And so I would agree with you, 2-3 years ago, but I think we're at a point where it's a little less convenient, but it's not catastrophic for user adoption. And, it's sometimes having too much liquidity and too high of a market cap can be as much of a curse as having too little. And DEXs do kind of give you a nice way of growing organically and you get to a certain threshold. But I understand the frustration. It sucks when you have this amazing ecosystem and these incredible users, and you're kicking ass, and you got Dogecoin with this incredible liquidity and they're everywhere. And then you're like, well, I'm 100 times better. Why the hell are we a second-class citizen and we can't get anywhere? Like Ergo is a great example. They're having a hell of a time getting listings, and look how much innovation has come out of that ecosystem, and they absolutely deserved fair consideration, and they should absolutely be listed. And it's just not fair that they've been treated the way they have been.
Yeah, and we're going to have this Rosen bridge up, and they're going to be able to bridge Doge over to Cardano, and then you can use it on Axo Trade or whatever. Hey, all awesome stuff. Adam, you've been here for a while and got your hand up. Glad to have you here. Happy holidays. Love that Santa hat. What you got going on, man?
Hey, Rick, Merry Christmas. Yeah, I was just, with this conversation, thinking about the way that all of us as ADA holders and people within the Cardano community should be keeping in mind the way we think about Cardano as a network state. And it's because of the way that Cardano approaches, the blockchain trilemma of really valuing decentralization. Fireblocks is awesome. I would equate Fireblocks kind of with Midnight in the fact of like serving businesses in a very particular way that they absolutely need the services for, but it's not going to be a network state the way that Cardano, Ethereum, Polkadot, Cosmos can be a network state. And so when we think about this, we need to think about, how are we going to approach these projects? How can the different little platoons within our network state be taking on these jobs? And sometimes it's going to be the job of Cardano Foundation to go out there and have relationships with DEXs. I'm sorry, I meant to say with SEXs, centralized exchanges, and with other institutions. Sometimes it's going to be, projects working on particular pieces of software. But, we're going to have to think about like what everyone can do to contribute to the community, and then, find a way to empower them without trying to control everything from the top down, because the power we have is decentralization. And I'm just have been, thrilled the way that things have been going, of the way we've been thinking about that and the way we've been setting things up to really empower people.
Thank you, Adam. And I'm so glad to have Adam in this ecosystem. I learn a lot from him. I listen closely when I get into these meetings with him because he has a PhD in the social sciences and he also has his feet on the ground. This guy's in the trenches with us. Love the work you do, man. Hey, we got Hosky up here, Cardano's favorite pepperoni. Come on, Hosky, come on up here. What you got, man?
Hey, what's up? Yeah, so in terms of, getting different centralized exchanges, for instance, Coinbase, to, list different Cardano projects and things, I'm old enough to remember back when Coinbase only allowed Bitcoin. And at that time, the rhetoric was that they would not support any other coins. it wasn't until Charlie Lee, the creator of Litecoin, started working for Coinbase did they add Litecoin, and then the other coins seemed to follow. That being said, it's not technically impossible. It's all about supply and demand. And what I've seen recently with Bonk getting listed on Coinbase is that meme coins seem to be a gateway into exchanges listing different chains. And I'm seeing things with SNEC, I'm seeing things with the Hosky token, and perhaps that might be a gateway to get listed on the exchange. But that all being said, Charles Hoskinson, I'm a huge fan of your project. And I actually just started this summer getting involved, making YouTube videos and things like that. And I just recently saw that you made the tweet about the Cardano Academy. So I want to give everybody, to take a look at the Cardano Academy, and I'm definitely going to be taking that course because there's so much to learn, and I'm so excited. And yeah, big ups. Stay positive. All right, peace.
All right, thanks, number one Hosky fan, and tell the big pepperoni I said hi. All right, we have a bunch of stuff we're going to go over here today, and there's so much stuff. Charles, I hope you have enough time. There was one with like Midnight as a partner chain, and sometimes I get the question, if a chain or chain developers, they want to bring their chain up as a partner chain with Cardano, who should they contact to get the technical details on connecting? We know that there's the substrate stack is coming into play here, but is there any humans or technical experts that you happen to know that people should get in touch with if they're trying to bring up their chain as a partner chain with Cardano?
Yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit. The thing is, there's a group of people working on partner chains. There's a group of people working on Cardano, and there's a group of people working on Midnight. Now, these three groups of people are very tightly coordinating and talking to each other because the end goal is to get to a state where you have a turnkey framework where it's relatively straightforward to be able to deploy a partner chain. And there's a lot of things that have been kind of pre-done so that you can just focus on the service that you want to offer. But to get there, it's going to require some updates to Cardano itself. For example, the way Cardano's consensus works, the latency for a transaction between the partner chain and the main chain, from the main chain to the partner chain, would be a bit too high. So the VRF needs to be improved, and then we also need a finality gadget. So that's one dimension that has to be added in. And then there's a lot of little things with Plutus that need to be cleaned up a little bit and improved so that you have a trustless ZK bridge between both items. But then also there's the two big houses of concepts. So one concept is this idea of a hybrid application, and that's not really well understood, so I'll kind of go into it. And then another house of concept is this idea of a dual token model, and that's also not really well understood. So it's probably good to get into that. And when you understand both these things, you start really understanding why this is such a powerful, amazing thing for Cardano and actually the broader blockchain ecosystem of all the different cryptocurrencies. So first, with respect to a hybrid application, we typically think of apps in terms of network effects. So you say, oh, okay, well, I'm on Ethereum and I can't leave Ethereum because, well, everybody's on Ethereum. So even if you have this other amazing chain, I'm not going to migrate over because I like the users here and the network effect here. That's fair. It's like people stay on Windows even if they don't like Windows because they want the network effect or whatever. Well, what happens when you want to upgrade your application to contain a new functionality? It would be a lot better, instead of saying the upgrade requires migration, to look at the upgrade in terms of almost like a service-oriented model where you call a service, and that just happens to be a foreign chain, and you pay in your underlying currency. So what we're aspiring to do when you look at Midnight, but more broadly, partner chains, is to look at partner chains as services. That's why we call it the Cardano service layer. And every one of them provides something. Like, for example, World Mobile, you have this idea of decentralized telco, or maybe SingularityNet wants to launch a decentralized LLM to compete with ChatGPT, or you got Midnight, which adds this amazing privacy layer to the system. So imagine you're like a DEX, and it's kind of a straw man example, and you want to start adding some conditions to regulate your DEX a little bit, but keep it roughly decentralized. So what you do is just say, okay, from an Ethereum perspective, instead of having every transaction that goes in and out be just a transaction, I'm going to make it multi-sig. So you send it in, but another signature needs to be there to have it settle. And when I want to withdraw, it needs to be multi-sig. And then that other signature is actually the Midnight Network. And in it has a series of smart contracts that have the whole regulatory layer of how compliance is going to work and escrow and all these other things. So from an Ethereum perspective, you've just made a very modest change, but that second signature, you're actually calling into Midnight, consuming a resource there. You pay an Ether, and then some sort of internal private DEX in Midnight kind of sorts it all out, and you're consuming a service from a completely different blockchain. Now, that's awesome because suddenly an Ethereum user is now a consumer of a blockchain service that ultimately came from the Cardano ecosystem. So their users are our users. They didn't have to migrate, and it created token demand for the entire system. Now, the dual token model makes this even better because what it's doing is saying, okay, your ownership, your governance, your network maintenance, that's going to live on Cardano's Cardano native asset. And then you're going to have the fuel for these services that people offer. That's going to be generated by those ownership tokens that live in on the mainnet. And that fuel can have a different monetary policy. So we tend to really like and love deflationary monetary policy, and that's awesome. But if you're talking about a fuel source, you probably want a different monetary policy because you're looking for predictability of pricing. If I am a DApp user and I'm calling an infrastructure, whether it's centralized or decentralized, I don't want my users to have completely unpredictable costs on a daily basis. I don't want a situation where my user is sitting there saying, God, it was $4 today to use this service, but today it's $20 and tomorrow it's $7. I mean, you can't run a business if you have margins where you have that radical variation. You want predictability over a horizon of time, like any centralized service. But you want decentralized services to replicate that. So a dual token model basically allows you to have variable monetary policy on the fuel side, connect it to the token that lives as a native asset on the mainnet, and then suddenly you can start exploring different policies there, consumption dynamics. So that's kind of those three pieces coming together, some upgrades to Cardano, a framework that basically allows you to build these things and has a way of parameterizing a dual token and a way of consuming services in a cross-blockchain sense. And then Midnight is a case study on an example of a high-value service that functionally is going to be the bridge between the traditional financial world and all those traditional financial applications in the Web3 space. So you can kind of bring those two things together, and that's a multi-trillion-dollar marketplace, the security tokens and real-life assets and these types of things to kind of come in. And you'll notice that that creates natural consumption of things on Cardano. And actually, it means that people pay in what they want to pay in, and they don't have this maximalism anymore of my token or your token. It all kind of just works its way out. Because that's what consumers are used to. If I go to Argentina and I buy something, I don't have to convert my money to pesos. I have a credit card, and it just all works. It's magic in the back end. So similarly, if I'm running a DApp, I don't want to have, oh God, what token am I in? Or it just works, and it works its way out. And the more of those transactions you have, the better for the peso in Argentina. And similarly, the more of these transactions you have, ultimately the better for the Cardano ecosystem. Now, in terms of a lot of details of how do you connect these things together and all that, that's what we're learning through the DevNet process. And, that's what we're learning, building. And my goal is for the partner chain framework, because of its enterprise use case and its cross-blockchain appeal, I'd like to see that as a Hyperledger project. And I think that's probably the best way to put that together. In terms of Midnight itself, it's its own ecosystem, and it's a service layer on Cardano, so it provides that to not only Cardano applications, but it's going to, of course, have the interconnections to sell into as many blockchain ecosystems as possible, because that brings demand to Cardano, and it really showcases the power and value of that. But then if we really want to be successful, we got to get to the business of getting a lot of partner chains launched on Cardano. And the good news is those partner chains have natural use cases. Replacement of Infura, so decentralized hosting and infrastructure, a decentralized large language models, decentralized social network, any D piece of infrastructure. That's what you're really looking for. And by the way, we don't have to change the monetary policy of Cardano. It ultimately creates more demand at the end of the rainbow for ADA, and stake pool operators get more revenue streams from this. So it's a huge project. There's probably more than, I'd say, 150 engineers and scientists that are working across all three of those domains. And that's just on the IO side. And as it broadens with Intersect and you get others to do that, there's an enormous amount of stuff that needs to happen there. And it's an open source project at the end of the rainbow, too. And what's nice is we got kind of a huge leapfrog with getting parity substrate as a starting point. But it's really important to understand it is not stock parity substrate. There's going to be humongous amounts of upgrades and modifications and additions. For example, the Cardano network stack is being ported over. It's written in Rust. And so it's not stock parity Cardano, network that we spent tens of millions of dollars building the best network stack in the world for cryptocurrency. We would be bloody insane to throw that away for our partner chain framework. Brand new consensus protocols are being developed and then run in this setting with Minotaur, and there's a lot of magic there. So that's all new code, and different way of doing pallets, all kinds of stuff. So there's a big deviation from what Substrate brought to the table, but then there's an acknowledgement that there was a lot of amazing engineering work that the Polkadot community did, and they have 190 parachains that they've tested it on. So it makes absolutely no sense at all to throw all of that work away. It's just hybridizing that and keeping the best parts and blending them. And frankly, that's what we should be doing as an industry, is that everybody's doing good work. Let's stop fighting each other. Let's acknowledge it. And the highest compliment is not a tweet saying you're doing good work. The highest compliment is taking the code and building on top of that code. That's what open source truly means at its core.
Yeah, if it's battle tested, use it. And hey, I got to thank there's a lot of dApps and developers in the audience right now. Spectrum Finance is here, Liquid, Igon, Congo from Levy Finance and the Apes is here, Optum Finance. I'm glad to see all you folks here. Y'all made my day. Y'all made my year 2023, building all this cool stuff and just putting out amazing products. And in reference to what Charles was just talking about here with the parachains, partner chains, and all the technologies coming up, I think the developers in the Cardano space and the developers in the Cardano space also come from other spaces. They come from Ethereum, Polkadot. They're starting to build out a user experience where even though parachains or partner chains sounds complicated, and using Hydra as a layer 2 sounds complicated, I think they're going to figure out how to make a user experience so it's easy. One of the most common questions I get is how do I get into crypto? I have friends, they just want to get in the door, and I tell them, okay, the first thing you got to do is go on Kraken or Coinbase and make an account so you can get crypto, right? You got to get it in your hands. And then once they get past that hurdle, then they can get into the ecosystem space and actually use all the products that are in the space. And they like literally just want to hand me a bucket of money, and I tell them, no way in hell, I am not taking custody of other people's money. And they're like, look, I'm just going to give it to you and you invest it for me. And I said, there ain't no way I'm doing that. I could get in so much trouble because I am not certified to do that kind of stuff. Even though they're friends, they're like, oh, I don't care, you're just a buddy. I'm like, that's not what's going to happen if all that goes down the drain. If it goes to zero, it's all going to change. So shout out to all you developers. Love you guys. You're doing awesome. Hey, we had a couple other things. Charles, how much time you got left?
I got to get going here in about 30 minutes or so.
Okay. Now, this wasn't an AMA or a stump the chump kind of. We're just getting on the latest news. And one of the items that came up in the latest news is Elizabeth Warren submitted a bill, and she has 6 people backing it. She submitted a bill, the Digital Asset Anti-Money Laundering Act of 2023. Okay. Now, what I need everyone to do here is to write your congressional representatives and write your senators and tell them to downvote that. Vote against it because it's way too heavy-handed. Now, the general idea is they want to prevent anti-money laundering, but we know how the titles of the acts go. The devil's in the details. And once you look into the details of the way that particular bill is written, basically it wants to force wallet makers to make wallets a certain way. It kind of, in my humble opinion, it kind of wants to deputize the wallet makers almost into being like law enforcement. Now, they call it compliance, like, oh, wallet maker, you have to comply with our laws. But more the way I'm reading it, it's like, this isn't about making wallet makers comply with the laws. It's kind of like making wallet makers and be the law enforcement. I know that sounds a little embellished, but I've seen legal experts give opinions where this particular bill violates in the First, Fourth, and Fifth Amendments in the United States, And I'm like, wow, that's an interesting take. And then they gave examples of how and why by compelling someone to write code a certain way.
Well, Rick, you saw that she was a big supporter of CBDCs, right? You saw that video?
I saw that video and I was like, wow.
She thinks it's the second coming. She really, Miss Anti-Bank is all about CBDCs. That was super creepy.
Yeah, yeah. Orwellian. It was
Oh,
Orwellian in nature. Charles, what's your
yeah.
take on that?
Yeah.
I'm glad you bring it up, Rick. First off, all my hot takes on things, they always get cut up and I get a 5-second or 10-second snippet. And then you get a headline, Charles hates Bitcoin and Charles is at war with Bitcoin. I was like, oh, fuck you guys. I don't hate Bitcoin. But you can't quote me in saying I'm not a fan of Elizabeth Warren. There's a philosophy that exists within a certain plank of it's not just the Democrat Party, it's the Republican Party as well. There's an authoritarian streak of we must be in control. And you see this with speech, you see this with commerce, you see this with association. You're not allowed to be friends with the people we don't like. You're not allowed to buy the things we don't like. You're not allowed to have opinions we don't like. And we also are like a jealous boyfriend who goes through your phone every night. We want to see every single thing you bought, every single person you're talking to, just to be sure you're not doing anything wrong. And what's so extraordinary about it is that any common sense person would be saying, well, why are you qualified to have so much domain and control over my life? Are you like a deity? Did you come down from Mount Olympus? Is Zeus your dad? I mean, do you have some omniscience or special power? No, they're just people. They're people who have fucked up personal lives. There are people who are corrupt. There are people who are suffering the same flaws that we do, but somehow they give themselves a special authority or power to have this kind of dominion over our existence. And Elizabeth Warren is an extraordinary example of it. She somehow says that the same government that elected Donald Trump, the same government that has Jake Clapper in it, who lies to us about the Snowden stuff, the same government that ran Iraq and Afghanistan for 20 years, the same government that loses trillions of dollars on a regular basis and can't remember who killed who, where, when, is somehow, some way, the most qualified government in the world to know every single thing about your personal financial life and control the whole thing. So you're really comfortable, like, let's go down the CBDC road of transaction asset discrimination. So you go to the gas station and you go and try to buy some gasoline for your car, and then it says, "Oh, I'm sorry, you've already filled up your car today. You're not allowed to fill it up again." It's environmentalism. Oh no, we just have to have that power because global warming or whatever the fuck it is. It's just nonsense. Or sorry, you can't donate your money to this group because we've decided that that's hate speech and this particular group's an evil group. And you're like, the Ronald McDonald Foundation? Oh yeah, that clown, he's a monster. It's just these people are nuts. And to me, it's so patently offensive and antithetical to the foundations of the United States of America and the liberty that the United States of America has. But, a free society tolerates these insane voices, and a free society tolerates these people, and that's okay. We just have to acknowledge that they should not, their dreams should not become reality. And I take great solace in the fact that out of the 350 bills that Elizabeth Warren has proposed, only one has passed. So she's not a particularly effective lawmaker, and I'm glad that she's found 6 co-sponsors. That just tells me that's in the future 6 primary challenges and 6 campaigns that we have to, fund the opposition candidates of. They're letting themselves be known who is an enemy of freedom and liberty and who's an enemy of the American people, and their ability to just live their lives and be left alone. CBDCs will come somewhere, and we already see them with the People's Bank of China and social credit. They are tools for tyranny. The financial panopticon that is the current U.S. financial regulatory regime is a tool for tyranny. We should never, ever say, well, can we have like 30% less tyranny? How would you like to have like 30% less being murdered? I'm only going to stab you 14 times instead of 20 times. You're still dead. It's nuts. You don't compromise with tyranny. You don't compromise with tyrannical people. You can never keep them happy. Just like you don't compromise with a jealous, crazy boyfriend. So I'm only going to go through your phone like once a day instead of twice a day. You're still a crazy person. It's still an unhealthy, toxic relationship. you fire them and file a restraining order and let everybody know how crazy this person is. And that's literally what Warren is. She's going through everybody's phone, and we have to move on as a society from this, and we have to call it what it is. It's evil. It's against the American dream. It's against what we fought a revolution over. And every single American needs to wake up and know who these people are. And this is not a Democrat thing or a Republican thing. It's an authoritarian versus non-authoritarian thing. There's plenty of people who are Democrats on the left who think this behavior is reprehensible. And there's plenty of people on the right who actually want to embrace this type of behavior just against the speech they don't like. So we have to set those partisan divides aside and realize that this is a political movement. And we need to grow up and preserve and protect liberty whenever possible. And part of that is cryptocurrencies and blockchain, because that preserves and protects us.
I'm glad you got the same read on Elizabeth Warren as I did. Crazy lady. She's a control freak. And they're going to start to realize real quick, 40% of Americans, of USA citizens, hold cryptocurrencies, far more than enough to flip any federal election. I've got some hands up here. Charles doesn't have much time left, only about 15 minutes. We got Johnny, Adam, and Power to the Edges. Johnny, what you got, buddy? Happy New Year, happy Merry Christmas and all that.
Oh, thank you, Rick. Hey, Charles, long time no talk. You've often talked on AMAs about the 13 or plus kind of different firms that have contributed to Cardano in one way or another. With the OSPO, it's nice to see the OSPO taking shape at Intersect. What can we do to kind of really not just grow the maintainer diversity, but also kind of highlight and kind of align some of those maintainers and core contributors to Cardano to more of the enlightened self-interest as opposed to the traditional mercenary self-interest?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's the $64,000 question. By the way, good to see you again, Johnny. Johnny used to work with IO for years, and now I think you guys are Catalyst funded, you and Dora, for a project with Catalyst, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, that's right. We're working on kind of really focusing on talking to the builders of Cardano and talking about their pains and joys, and it's been a really good experience.
That's such a cool promotion to go from working for one of the companies to working directly for the blockchain. They say, talk about cutting out the middleman. That's awesome. But you ask a great question. And really, there's three things that need to be done. So one, we have to simplify the process of contributing to Cardano, and also some of the things that make Cardano very complicated as a technical project. For example, we need end-to-end specifications and blueprints for Cardano. And what I would like to do in the process of getting those specification blueprints out and translate from LaTeX to AGDA is that it would be really cool to find a way to retire Byron support and just start from Shelley and move forward. That already would dramatically simplify competing code bases. And so you can actually get a Go project and a Rust project. And we've had some conversations about what it would take to write some palettes and actually have Substrate deploy Cardano. So Cardano deploys Substrate and Substrate deploys Cardano. So you have a Rust code base and you have a Haskell code base. It's not as crazy and inconceivable as one has. And there's already an Ouroboros Go project that's floating around. So simplifying the designs and then allowing client diversity to form, then you start getting actually some really nice interoperable nodes, and then you get teams with different engineering philosophies basically coexisting in the same space. And that already removes all the groupthink, and it forces more diversity and decentralization. So that's kind of one pillar to it. The second pillar to it is that you have to have a better way for people to participate in the overall roadmap of Cardano. And I'd really encourage you and Dor to meet Solona. She's, I mentioned, an advisor who's working with Mike and others about the product function at Intersect. But it'd be really cool for you to share some feedback about how you guys think the product function should work and how people need to contribute to the product backlog. And there's been some great examples in the ecosystem where that's worked really well as an OSPO, with Hydra as an example, where a lot of people just came together and there's a lot of firms working on it. There's already competing implementation of Hydra with Hydra Zoa. So that's a very fertile thing and a very small investment overall. So I think if we really focus next year at Intersect at building out a strong product function that is very diverse, then you're going to end up getting a ton of new contributions and contributors, and we're going to have a real good time with that. Third, the treasury of Cardano itself can actually bootstrap diversity of development. So it's already happening. So for the Dev Trust and Intersect are actually, they have not just contracts with IO infrastructure, but also their contract with Gawa, and I believe the Tweeg is getting their contract for Genesis work there, and I think WellTyped is going to get a contract. So instead of having a contractor-subcontractor relationship with one big umbrella of project management, getting a diverse set of dev grants that come to different entities, both large and small, I think that creates natural diversity. And then once they've built up a lot of interest, what ends up happening is those open source developers tend to stick behind, and you end up bootstrapping a pretty big ecosystem. So the power of the purse strings, both with Catalyst and the broader Cardano budget, and how Intersect's governance uses that to allocate grants for certain things of significant concern, I think will naturally get a lot of developers into the ecosystem. But there's no one size fits all. You need to simplify and make it easier to build a full client. You need to have competing code bases and different developers with different philosophies, so that you don't have the same 50 people again and again. And you also need to use the power of the purse string from the budget to incentivize some diversity and make sure you have multiple vendors instead of one vendor. So basically, you get resiliency and redundancy inside the procurement. But it's going to take a year or two to kind of see that reach its fruition. And that's what happened in Hyperledger with a lot of the Hyperledger projects. There used to be the IBM show. Then it was the IBM and Intel show. Now there's over 100 companies that are floating around there, and they're doing things, and vast majority of the contributions are uncompensated within that ecosystem. So Daniela has really done a phenomenal job growing that ecosystem and taking it to the kind of the next level. And so there's a lot to learn from there, which is why we've been members of Hyperledger for a while, and we moved one project over with Atala Prism, and it's a great knowledge transfer. And I hope that knowledge transfer can, as a case study, enter into the Cardano ecosystem and our journey towards a more resilient open source ecosystem.
If I could just jump in here real quick, if I have one thing on my wish list as far as getting these grants out into the hands and diversifying the development methodologies, is that we start figuring out a way to add in Agile and Scrum development milestones in addition to the current grants are all in Catalyst and in Intersect. They're all currently waterfall, and I would love to figure out a way to adapt some of that part of that. And I know this is kind of in the weeds a little, but I just would love to get a way to start really recognizing the Agile and Scrum development methods to get grant money done and get in and out with projects.
Yeah, it's important to point out that not everything in Cardano is waterfall. Like Hydra is a great example, and Mithril is another example of things that would never follow. They follow very agile. They like release every 2 weeks or something like that. And the whole roadmap is kind of fluid and dynamic, and they have a rough idea of what they want to do long term and a really good idea of what they want to do short term. And if you go to like Hydra.family and you take a look at the GitHub repos, how they manage the project management, it's very, very agile. But you're right to point out that there's a little bit of waterfall. But the challenge with it is that if you start from a pure formal methods research-based approach, there is a linear sequencing of things. You have a research paper, you have a formal specification, then you have code. So really what has to happen is you have to talk about SRL and what level of SRL your expectations are, and where can you admit move fast and break things mentality, and where do you want deep, intense formalism and in a slower, more methodical way of doing things. I think one of the problems we've had as an ecosystem is that we kind of had a one-size-fits-all strategy of everything has to kind of fit in one box. And that was great from a resiliency and a security viewpoint. It was not great from an adoption and agility viewpoint. And then what's happening is things are starting to get a little looser. Like partner chains is written in Rust, and that's its own framework, and that certainly follows a very different development methodology and philosophy than Haskell and Agda and these types of things. Yet that's now a major part of our growth vertical. The other thing is that we're starting to see some diversity in the Cardano core programming languages. So you have untyped Plutus core, but that's a compile target. And you already have Aiken, which is a radically different language than Plutus TX. And there's actually a TypeScript project on Cardano as well. And so one of the things I talked to Mike Ward about is I said, I'd love to see some open source FTEs basically just go and support the TypeScript side and the Aiken side and be at the discretion of those projects and programs, however they want to evolve. And let's just contribute like we do to Haskell as open source developers, so that as a Cardano developer, you now actually have 3 different paths. You kind of have a web-oriented path with a TypeScript style dialect. It looks a lot like Solidity. You have a Rust style path, and very nice for that Solang type of notion. And that's from a lot of mainstream developers that are interested in the C world. That's very comfortable for them. And then you have a high assurance path with Haskell, where we can really focus in on high assurance tooling. So you basically build mission critical applications like the JEDs of the world, where the consequence of failure is a Luna style situation. Our ecosystem commit all 3 of those, and they have radically different paces of development and different software readiness levels and assurance levels. And you just kind of let the marketplace decide, and the consumers decide where to focus that. So I'm all for different dev paradigms, and I do believe that they're already happening at every level in the ecosystem. It's just the branding of formal methods and high assurance and science and stuff is so strong in Cardano that it kind of drowns out everything else, and we all kind of think that's the only way we ever do things.
Absolutely, and from that, the formal method for the ledger, no question, that's got to be there. And I'm mostly saying in the grant scenario. So when we're talking Intersect and talking Catalyst, where we need to find a way to honor especially like you said, for the stuff that's not that mission critical. It's the stuff that's added on, that's tooling that's going to make the lives better of a lot of people, but maybe not require that level of intensity, that we can honor these other methods for getting that and get the grant funding through those and honor the development being done that way. It's a little harder to map it right now, and that's all I'm saying. So I'd love to get that mapped closer to.
Well, and I agree with you. And actually, you should take it a step further, because there needs to be diversity. And again, one thing I'm really pushing for is fund pairing. So when you fund a project or program, you also fund the auditor or oversight mechanism at the same time. And that means that you can have some dynamicism of what the definition of success is and who is the person actually checking the box that they've actually delivered. I don't think a one-size-fits-all solution makes sense, because your level of audit and oversight for buying T-shirts for a conference for $25,000 is a world of difference in $1 million program, and they need different oversight. But then you also can diversify that tuple and add in a different development methodology and different checkpoints of success. So when you're de-risking something or you're conducting a learning experiment, one of the best things you can do is an agile fail-fast approach, where every 2 to 3 weeks you have a sprint and you publish the results, and you ought to do that publicly. And actually go to YouTube and kind of have a live session and talk about all your learnings and what you have planned for the next thing. And that's kind of like what the Hydra team has been doing. They have a really good model for that. If you're doing science translation, then that's a radically different approach. But even within that, we've had a lot of discussions about how can you do this in a less rigid way. It should not take 2 years or 3 years for a scientific paper to become a protocol if you've resolved most of the big questions. And the reason why it takes that long is because waterfalls never waterfall. The salmon swim up the waterfall. So when you're doing something, you realize that the paper was written in a very inflexible way, and you have to go back and rewrite the paper. Then you go back to prototyping. Then you go back and rewrite the paper. Then you go back to prototyping. You go back and rewrite the paper. Then you can write a spec. Then once you've written the spec, you find out the spec is not realistic for the operating reality, and then you have to go back and rewrite the spec. And then maybe you have to rewrite the paper. Yeah, it's like horrible waterfall. So there's got to be a translational agile checkpoints that are there in research transfer. And it's been the bane of my career for the last 7 years, just dealing with the latency of these things. Guys, it's so hard to have solved a major problem and have it sitting on your table since like 2018 and say, God, if I had this in market, we would crush every cryptocurrency. And to wait for years for that to be realized, it makes me sad. It's why I don't drink, because I'd have an alcohol problem if that was my life.
Well, Charles, 3 years ago, Mithril was just a paper, and now I'm using it. So well done, sir. Hey, we got 3 hands up. Let's get Power to the Edge, Adam, then Congo.
Just on that, Rick, we have like a new version of Mithril already, ALBA, that we wrote with the Algorand guys. And so you're using it, but I want like the new Mithril because we just have it. I don't want to wait 2 years for new Mithril. You should have new Mithril.
I'm gonna have to look into that after we get off the Twitter space. Oh man. Okay, Charles doesn't have much time left, so let's get Power to the Edge. What you got, buddy?
Hey, so Hey, thanks. Happy New Year, and thanks again to both of you guys for doing this. I have a couple questions around the partner chain strategy and midnight. But before I ask my questions, Charles, I just got to say, man, I don't think you get recognized and acknowledged enough. Not only for all the contributions you've made to the space, but your overall commitment to try and make the world a better place. And like a lot of people, I first discovered you back in 2017 with your whiteboard video. I've been following you ever since. And I think with Cardano, you set out on probably one of the most ambitious roadmaps of the entire space. And much of what you talked about, geez, I think all the way back in that TED Talk video, you've delivered on. And in my view, I just think your leadership has helped to not only create one of the fastest growing communities, but one with the most well-grounded culture, that's focused on putting the interests of a global community first ahead of individual personal gains. And dude, I just want to say thanks for staying the course. Number one, not letting all the haters drive you away, and giving us a chance to see the real you. I kind of look back and there was a 2017 version of Charles. I think the 2024 version of Charles is even a hell of a lot stronger and wiser. And just want to raise a virtual glass to you, man. I'm forever grateful. So my question though, I got a couple questions if you don't mind. You've been real transparent and forthcoming as you set out on all these R&D plans. Things don't always pan out as you originally intend. And you've also pointed out in the partner chain framework, there are a number of components that require a lot of work. I think you called out the trustless bridging component, enabling dApps to be able to talk seamlessly between the multiple service layers. You talked about the log space mining and the super node. And I think even with Babel fees, there was some unfinished business around a DDoS concern to make sure that nobody could basically flood mempools with unresolvable limited liabilities. So my question is, as you guys progress through all the stages of development for these key components of the partner chain framework, I got to believe as you get to a certain point in the development phase, you reach a point where it's certain that these capabilities are going to make their way on the mainnet. And before you get there, there's uncertainties, that they ever come to fruition. So I was wondering if you could just give us some more color on these major components. Are
Yeah.
there still some elements that aren't quite there yet from an R&D perspective, or are you guys so far along you're like, look, this is coming together, it just is going to take some work and some time?
Yeah, I remember that we worked on Midnight for 5 years before we actually started publicly talking about it. So there was certainly a big chunk of the iceberg that was underwater. But yeah, there are still some rough edges. For example, there's open questions about how aggressive to be on the multi-resource consensus model and how to stage that. And so all of next year, there's going to be a lot of tuning on the Minotaur agenda, and that has to climb the SRL to a reasonable level. But it's not a barrier for the first generation of partner change. It's just one of those things where you have to decide, what's a reasonable first step. Other things like ZK bridging, it's going to happen for an industry-wide concern, and we're tracking the state of the art. But you don't need it at launch because you can use trusted execution environments and some other overlay trips to build very secure bridging mechanisms. And there's already several that are floating around. So, worst comes to worst, there's a fallback that you can have. So usually what you do is you try to layer innovation with a good fallback, meaning that if we don't quite get there, we have a plan B that is good enough for launch. And then what you do is you kind of work your way towards where you need to go. And what ends up happening is that it all kind of works its way out in the wash. Like the iPhone is the greatest example in the world of a collection of second concerns. So for example, they launched it, didn't have 3G, and it didn't have an app store. But when we all remember the iPhone, we don't remember it that way. We're like, oh, yeah, that app store is awesome. It's like they didn't have an app store. They planned it and they eventually got there, and it was so good that we all just don't remember it that way. But it was actually a very beta product, when Steve Jobs was out there in 2007 saying, hey, this is the way to go. So I think there's a little bit of that, and you kind of co-evolve these things together. But one of the reasons why you choose substrate as a starting point is that it saves you an enormous amount of time on the commoditized stuff that you have to do. It's the broccoli, it's the the vegetables in the blockchain world, but it's not your core innovation. It's not your core USP. So you kind of leapfrog all of that, and you start from a very reliable base, and you have a great time to focus in on some of these innovations. So there's also other things like, yeah, you're right, Babel fees requires a little bit of work, but a lot of enormously good work was done with that tiered pricing and other primitives. It's just the core team has to be made available for it. And the question is, how much of that can be diversified to third-party programs, and how much of that, what about the core team itself? And so I think kind of around April, they're going to seriously start working on that type of stuff. And I would love to see if they could do that at the same time as doing some other plumbing, like getting Mithril into the core node, because that would just be dramatic for our ecosystem if we could get a primitive like that. And the utility it has for data availability, if you put a marketplace on it, is huge. But yeah, this is just one of the things. And 2024 is going to be a crazy busy year. And there's going to be more development done in 2024 than probably 2022 and 2023 combined, when you look at the raw number of commits and code done, and a lot of compromises that have to come in to kind of get that first generation technology out. But you know what? Look at the story Cardano. We had Byron Reboot. We had Shelly Classic, which had the D parameter. You guys were all around for that. You remember, like, D slowly going down, and then that came out, and that was not exactly the best of experiences, but it certainly got a hell of a lot better. And now compare where we're at as an ecosystem to where we were even at the Shelly hard fork, and how much further we've come. So you have to kind of get into that mindset of, it's okay. We can do certainly something beta, and we can move forward. Now, you were right to point out that there were certain things that were missing in the roadmap that we would have loved to have had. Like Yella and K is a great example of that. The ocean strategy with smart contracts. Guys, you have no idea how much I tried as a CEO. This is an example of where Charles Hoskinson is not master of the universe. I personally flew to University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. We had a 19-person team. I spent probably more than $10 million all in. I even invested in runtime verification as a company. And the problem is, it was just oil and water. I could not get those two teams to work effectively together because they have such radically different philosophies of computer science. Grigori is sitting here from the K frameworks and semantics-based compilation. He built something that looked like LLM, and it was called Yella, register-based assembly. It's a virtual machine. It's basically what Ethereum should have been. Had I been CEO of Ethereum, Yella would be the EVM. And Grigori did a phenomenal job designing it. But K is just so radically different, and that whole philosophy is so radically different than extended UTXO and Plutus, that the teams just could not effectively collaborate, work together. And I tried to build bridges. Bruno Pelio wrote a paper called Chimeric Ledgers, and it showed how to get those two systems working. But every single time they would get there, Phil Wadler called Grigori a charlatan in a research thing. I mean, this is just, and they're nice people, okay? So individually, everything's great, but these guys just would not work well. So, you have to pick a winner, and we're the functional programming side, and EUXO actually has a lot of benefits, all things considered, and K was never really evolved enough to do the full vision of semantic-based compilation, so it got dropped from the roadmap. But we came back to it 3 separate times over a 4-year period because it was so seductive what that was being offered. And I thought from a DevX, it would have been awesome for our ecosystem, because you'd have all these mainstream programming languages. You have a traditional count model that people are very used to. We had a natural port of verified ERC20. So there was actually 2 different ways to do assets on the system. But in hindsight, I think it was for the best, because it doesn't mean it's gone forever. It just means that it come as a partner chain now. And we now preserve protect determinism. Native assets are awesome. We have a much easier time with isomorphic state channels and Hydra and these types of things. So, to a certain respect, Manuel Chakravarty and Wadler were right in the long term, but it did carry a non-trivial pain to the Cardano ecosystem in that our developers just had to work a little harder to get to that end goal. But that's just an example of a technology where we tried our best to really get that where it needed to go and push super, super, super hard for it. The Cardano network stack is another example of where we tried super fucking hard. USPO's had a lovely time trying to configure that, working with it in the early days. And a lot of you here, we've been around so long to remember the incentivized testnet and, Poldercast, and trying to get Jormungandr to work with Poldercast. Oh, heaven and hell, that thing never worked properly. But I really wanted everything the network stack, and it took guys 6 years of research and development to get the Cardano network stack where it needs. Well, now that we're here, we don't have Solana level problems, and the network can be under 90% load, doesn't collapse, everything's working well, peer-to-peer is beautiful, and it's very easy to layer protocols with them in protocol design. That's great. But I remember a time where they always were like, oh, we'll have this feature in 6 months. We'll have this feature in 6 months. And I'm just sitting there just, imagining taking shots of whiskey, saying, God, why didn't we pick a more conservative network stack instead of innovating as much as we did? So, it's a mixed bag when you talk about innovation. And this is when you're an architect and you're thinking about an ecosystem and how to put things together end to end, you have to have the right balance of conservative decisions and mainstream decisions versus true innovation. And if we could be accused of anything in the Cardano ecosystem, I think the principal complaint is that in the beginning, because of our inexperience, we dreamed a little too big and we took too many technical risks, and we ended up delivering in the long term a really amazing thing, but it slowed us down a little bit, and we probably could have had a much easier drive had we took a slightly different road and probably gotten to the same place. But that's just what comes when you're new and you think everything's easy. And now that we're older, we got a little bit more white hair, we're a lot more nuanced, and there's a lot more balance. But that's also a reason why Intersect exists, because what ends up happening is that you have other people in the room to challenge assumptions, challenge design decisions, and ask very fundamental questions of, are you doing that because that's sexy and cool and new, or are you doing that because that honestly is the best approach and the most reasoned approach and the fastest to market, or whatever have you? And when you have that diversity of thought inside the room, what ends up happening is you get a much more balanced roadmap overall. So we'll see if all the decisions were the right decisions. There's certainly ones that I would have done differently if I was, back in 2015. But all things considered, it's $22 billion ecosystem. There's a ton of TVL, ton of transactions, an amazing community. And also it brought some of the smartest people in the world into our ecosystem. And those smart people are still here. And they pay attention to the system because it was so hard to do all this stuff. And we're starting to really feel the benefits of having those smart people around and those long-term design decisions. So overall, I think it was a pretty good success.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Charles. I mean, it's clearly, the work that everybody's done in this space relative to Cardano. I mean, so much novel type of technologies. I mean, obviously, you're going to have setbacks. I just had one more quick follow-up with respect to Midnight and it being the first partner chain, and obviously it's going to serve as a showcase for what's possible for the partner chain framework. The one thing that I've been confused about is I heard Aram Barak a couple times mention that their POS is going to come first for their consensus mechanism, but they're not leveraging Ouroboros. So
that's not true. I think that's a misstatement.
It is? Oh, okay. Because that was confusing to me.
So it's important to understand when we say leveraging Ouroboros, it is absolutely true that we're not using the main Ouroboros protocol in a conventional sense where the block manufacturing of a partner chain is Ouroboros. What's happening is there's an overlap of the stake pool operators on Ouroboros with the side chain, but you don't and you shouldn't use Ouroboros for a partner chain. And here's why. 90% of the expense and complexity of Ouroboros is establishing a quorum that's honest and trusted and is capable of generating blocks. And that's a really hard thing to do in Bootstrap for any layer one. Okay, so Ethereum doesn't get a pass, Polkadot doesn't get a pass. But if you already have a trusted quorum and you're sampling a subset of that quorum, what you can do is have that quorum run a BFT protocol, and they can be dramatically faster because you no longer have to pay this huge price of establishing a root of trust. You already have a root of trust. You already have the quorum. So you can accelerate the quorum dramatically using a piggyback protocol. And this is a fact that's been known for a long time in cryptocurrency research. In fact, there's a very early paper that was written by the founder of Avalanche, Amin Gunsir, called Bitcoin NG. And he said, hang on a second here. If I take all these Bitcoin miners that recently won and made a block, I could put them all together into a BFT protocol and I get 1,000x in performance. And this was something that Sylvia Macaulay recognized with Algorand, of this idea of a cryptographic sortition. So we paid the price of getting this quorum of stake pool operators. Now what you want to do is run a high performance BFT protocol and have them run on the partner chain. You get fast finality, and then you also get a reasonably high level of security. And what's cool about Minotaur is then you can then layer that with in-house security. So because I often get asked the question, is Midnight a layer 2 or a sidechain? And I say it's neither, and both. It's neither in that it does not rely solely on the security of the main chain for its security, and it doesn't rely on itself for its security. It actually borrows from both, and you can run multiple consensus algorithms at the same time. So ideally, I'd like to blend useful proof of work on Midnight with a BFT protocol enabled by the stake pool operators of Cardano. And how all of those pieces come together is that's why I say there's kind of three parts. There's a Cardano part, there's a framework part, and then there's a Midnight specific part. And that's going to take a little while to sort its way out. But here's the other cool thing is that these things always benefit each other. So when you talk about input endorsers, a lot of the ideas that we're learning from partner chains are kind of being taken from a test drive that could then be applied with the design of input endorsers and the long-term sharding and scalability of Cardano's main chain. So when these SPOs are running this, we're learning a lot that can then be used to actually run and accelerate Cardano transactions and basically make our network have a much higher native TPS rate, and so it's all interconnected in that respect. But it would be a misstatement to say that it just runs Ouroboros stock. That wouldn't make any sense. And also, there's no intrinsic value in that for the sortition. You want to take advantage that Cardano pays billions of dollars a year to create that root of trust and leverage it to accelerate the protocol.
Cool.
Gotcha.
Hey, thank you.
Thanks, Charles.
Thank you, Charles, and power to the edge. And we're a little bit in overtime, but that's okay. I'm going to get Adam, Congo, and then Hosky. Adam, what do you got, buddy?
Hey, Charles. We just had some great effort from the Intersect Cardano Foundation IO in promoting the CIP 1694 temperature check. Just want to know if you had any preliminary thoughts on that from your perspective on how it went and lessons learned from the Genesis entities.
Well, the Cardano ballot, I'm still trying to get an answer on this because my understanding is that Apache 2 open source, but then I heard from somebody it's closed source. I got to look into that because it's not our product, it's a foundation product. But in general, the thought process of ballot was that upgrade it to a point where it becomes an application the ecosystem can use and showcase how to do it with both a hot wallet and also a hardware wallet support. And once you have that there, then it becomes a tool you can use to ask questions. And then the long-term use case, I imagine, was that it would be used with DREPs, as DREPs are asking the people who've delegated to them, hey, what do you guys think about this? And there's the software could move in that particular direction. So I know the vote is closed. I think they're still tallying it. The results are going to be published here in a second. But what I asked the guys to do is to relate the temperature check with traditional polling theory. So, when you have a presidential election, like is it Clinton or Trump or Biden, you have polls, and the polls have statistical weight. Even though, you're not polling all the American people, that's what you do with the election. You're polling a statistically significant sample. And the idea is that within a margin of error, you kind of get a rough idea of the directionality of things. So polls are seldom completely accurate, but they're seldom dramatically wrong. So it's not the case if you're polling 55% in a U.S. presidential election and they do a statistical poll that suddenly come election day, you get only 30% of the votes. maybe you get like 51%, or maybe you do really great, you get 60%. That's what the margin of error is really telling you. But generally speaking, it's kind of where you'd expect it to be. It's in a bound. So the hope is that we can have a really good tool for polling, and then people can start using that, and they can get, even if they have a small sample, a statistically representative snapshot of where people's opinion happens to be. And if it's tight and close, it's telling you there's a significant problem. But if it's dramatic, it's telling you overall the direction seems to be right. And that's what we were looking at for that first temperature check, was directionality. Are we, roughly speaking, heading in the right direction? The other thing is that when you poll people and you give the option for a no vote, why? What ends up happening is you get the most extreme and aggressive and passionate voices to have a platform. Because people, if there's like, let's say it's 95%, 5%, people aren't going to care at all about the 95% who voted yes, but they'll actually care a lot about the reasons people voted no with the 5%. So paradoxically, you actually give a stronger voice to the radical minorities, to at least to have a platform of why they voted no and what was the reason behind that. So then you can look at those comments and you can say, okay, is there an accommodation that can be made, or is there something that we need to change to make that group a little happier? So overall, I think it'll probably come out to be, in the direction of 1694, and some polling theory will be applied to kind of get an understanding of what the margin of error is, and then you poll multiple times. And then what's nice is exactly what happened, I thought happened, which is, Solomon Dow came out and said, hey, what about us? And other people came out. And that's awesome, because it's creating a marketplace of consent. And that's good, because you want people who are building voting tools to advertise their voting tools and make the case to the community that their tools are better, because they're not advertising to Charles Hoskinson. What you guys are doing is you're advertising to the DREPs. Because at the end of the day, if you're a DREP or governance body like Intersect, you have to, on a regular basis, poll the Cardano ecosystem, both statistically and wholesale, to get an understanding of what people like and what they don't like. So your voting tools are different mechanisms of polling, and by advertising them and getting people to support them, you're creating a marketplace of ideas about what is legitimate consent. There's a guy in our ecosystem, his name's Kendrick, and he went to all the SIP 1694 workshops, and despite doing that, he's still an avid critic, and he says a lot of things like, oh, well, we just don't have the right voting system, or we need real life identity, or this centralized network, or whatever. Well, that's fair. Okay, whatever he wants to believe. Well, what's nice is at some point, I imagine he's probably going to partner with one of these polling tools, and because he believes so strongly in a particular way of getting consent, actually building that, and then we could start using that in the governance of Cardano and moving ourselves in that particular direction. And that's really what you want to do. You want to turn your critics into your products. Your critics go and actually build their own thing, and that ends up becoming part of the marketplace of ideas. So that was kind of my hope, and we could have easily built an in-house voting app, but the Cardano Foundation was building Ballot, and we said, instead of us building something unilaterally, let's collaborate with them. And then by working together, hopefully it becomes a nice open source project. And I would hope to see that kind of turn into a utility that everybody else can use. And it just becomes part of the marketplace of consent tools. And overall, it tells us where we go. But it's also important to understand there's layers of consent here. There's a second temperature check, plus there's the stake pool operators. At the end of the day, it's not going to be here unless 70% of the SPOs adopt it. So that's the threshold that's set, in addition to these temperature checks. And so there's a lot of stuff that has to happen between now and that hard fork. And I know every single SPO is taking this very seriously. This is the single most important decision they're ever going to make as an SPO, of what is the threshold in their mind for minimum viable governance, and what do they need to see. And I haven't met a single SPO who's not taking that seriously. So that's another data point in the evolution towards 1694.
Brilliant. Thank you, Charles. Adam, I hope that answered your questions. I want to get to two more folks. Congo, what you got, folks?
Yeah, GM, everybody. I have a question about a topic I get asked a lot about, especially lately. As you've kind of alluded to, Cardano is getting into a great place now, like with Icon, et cetera, which you've mentioned. Like, building on Cardano has never been easier. We were able to build Levy within like a few months, which is crazy to think back even a year ago. My question is, what is the plan for bridging and interoperability? Like, I assume there will be signatures, et cetera, for Midnight. Could they also be used for like IBC, ETH, et cetera?
Yeah. Well, that's why BLS support is so powerful, because that seems to be where the industry is moving for a lot of this stuff. And Plutus V4 will probably contain a lot of interoperability primitives as well. But it's just a marketplace. And the point of having Intersect is that you can go and talk to people, and then you say, okay, well, what do we really value? And what is our Wi-Fi standard? What is our Bluetooth standard? Like, what is that thing that everybody has and everybody uses, and then we have to support? And this might also come from the TradFi world. The open banking world has a bunch of standards. There's stuff from ISDA. There's stuff from ISO 222. So just because crypto wants to do something, it may actually be more useful adopting standards from the legacy world. So, I'm up for anything, and I don't really have a strong opinion one way or the other. I have cryptographic opinions, where I wake up and I say, what's good crypto? And that's why I love Mithril, and that's just why I love Pluto Eris and these types of things, because I think they're so powerful to say, hey, when you transmit data, you don't transmit it naked, you transmit it with an authentication mechanism, proof on the wire, so that you preserve a core principle of the cryptocurrency space, which is inclusive accountability. When somebody receives something, they should always have the ability themselves, without a trusted third party, to verify that what they've received is true. That's a core tenet of cryptocurrency, and it's what differentiates us from TradFi. If you can't verify it, it's not crypto. That's why asset-backed stablecoins aren't really truly crypto. Because at the end of the day, while you can verify you have the Tether or the Circle, you have absolutely no idea if they actually have a reserve or not. You're relying on a regulator and a bank to actually preserve that. Whereas you have an algorithmic stablecoin, you can check every single fact and circumstance all the way back to Genesis block, that what you're seeing is indeed accurate and true. And if you trust the trust model and you think those assets are what they are, it's crypto. So it's very important that we invest in fundamental technology that protects inclusive accountability. So that's what zero knowledge does for you, recursive snarks do for you, Mithril, these things, it preserves that and allows you to keep that at scale when you have giant blockchains and you can't hold all of that on your phone. But whether it's formatted in JSON, or it has a particular message header, or we follow this A over B, that's a market decision. Just like Wi-Fi is a market decision, or Bluetooth is a market decision. Just because you think you're smart, you're not smarter than a standard. The standard's a standard. You follow the standard, and you just format it in that particular direction. Bodies like Intersect can work with ISO. They can work with NIST. They can work with the European Union. They can work with the UK. They can work with the Middle East. We already have these relationships, and we're going to try to bring those relationships into Intersect. Like we worked very closely with NIST, for example, with the post-quantum crypto. And we and hundreds of other companies commented and participated for standards for the United States for post-quantum cryptography. I know those cryptographers. At some point, at some scale, it should be rather straightforward to get them to sit in on a few meetings and talk to people and kind of let us know where the United States Department of Commerce is going with some of these standards. It's the same with the open banking community. I was just in a Hyperledger group, and I talked to a gentleman from British Columbia who's doing all the procurement for their identity standards. And this is going to be identity for 5 million people in British Columbia. And they're using a non-creds, which is a self-sovereign identity standard. You see? So it's going to be trivial to go and talk to those guys and say, hey, why don't you come and intersect and kind of tell us what you're doing? And then once we talk about it as a community, we kind of have to decide what is a priority for us and what's not a priority. And that's how you achieve interoperability. You also look at economic demand. If like 75% of the market's doing something, if it doesn't compromise the integrity of the system, why the fuck aren't we doing it? Because we want to be extra special, cool people. We're the cool kids or something. It's like, so, you got to think this way too. And there's a bit of maturing that comes. Everybody has their favorite way of doing something. And unless there's a security reason for doing it, or a philosophical way of doing it, or there's a really strong economic reason to do that, it makes more sense to get along instead of hang separately. Anyway, everybody, I'm about 20 minutes late for a meeting, so I got to let everybody go. Rick, thank you so much for hosting this. Lloyd, it was great to see you. Hosky, great to see you. I'm sorry I couldn't spend all day with you. Cheers.
Thank you, Charles.
All right, cheers. Take care. All right. Hey, that was a good chat we had here. I'm going to hang out on the line here for a little while. And Hosky, you had your hand up. You got something you want to add? I'll bring Spectrum up here.
He bailed on me. I was trying to see if I was going to get a formal apology for an incident that happened earlier, but I guess I'll have to save that for the meeting I have with him later in the week. There was some I've called it a betrayal. I'm not going to go that far. But no, I think this was a good discussion. I think the biggest takeaway from this is us as an ecosystem have so much control and so much power, that people don't actually realize that this is kind of what we've been building for. These are the opportunities that we don't get in the real world oftentimes, to make these big decisions. So I'm looking forward to what's to come. I'm looking forward to what the future for Cardano holds. Regardless of price, I'm sure a lot of us are happy because number is going up. But outside of that, I think the growth that we've seen, within the ecosystem, I've been here since the beginning, 2017. I remember when Cardano was nothing. I remember when we had no smart contracts. I remember when we had no ecosystem. And just look at this current time that we're living, and look at where Cardano stands with the many products that many teams have put out. And we're just getting started. That's the crazy part. This is just the beginning. So, yeah, it was a great talk. Great to hear from Charles as always. Didn't get my apology, unfortunately. So we'll see.
Well, good luck with that. I think Freya is a female dog, so it's a dog eat dog world.
It is.
Glad to have you here, Hosky, and Merry Christmas. Spectrum, you had your hand up. No, hey, Ed, what you got, Spectrum?
I just got scammed by Charles. Wanted to ask a question about interoperability and partner chains. So basically, you asked the question uh, how to become a partner chain actually, and we didn't receive a proper answer on this question. Just wanted to pop up this question one more time because I think
Yep.
we've put 40 pages of how we can resolve interoperability problem for Cardano, and I see huge potential how our technology can help to solve this by our cross-chain smart contract platform. Okay, we'll
Let,
see next time.
let me try to take that spectrum a little bit, just from a just a broadly philosophical perspective. Well, the beauty of the space that we're all in is that it is permissionless. So if you've got something that you think is useful for the community, let's build it. Let's see it. Let's put it out there in the universe of ideas and make it happen. Yeah, to be a partner chain, you just show up and do the work. You just show up and add your voice to the fray, as it were. I know I could say this with certainty. I'm building. One of the things I'm working on right now with a team is a partner chain. We've got a couple of different ideas that we're building, some data access layer things that are needed in the real world. And I'm not shilling here today. I just, but those will be partner chains. That's what they're going to be. But I'm not asking anybody's permission to do that. We're just in there and we're just building and we're making it happen.
Yeah, and I think it could be that Spectrum is at the point where now I've read the Spectrum white paper, and it is very in-depth, extremely well written. Anyone here, I'd suggest you go read that Spectrum white paper. Pretty amazing stuff. So I think what he's asking is that he needs a very specific technical detail, like who is the point of contact, who's working out the technical interface with how to use the BFT protocol that would interface with the partner chain. So
The
I
guys
think,
in the Marconi side chain guys are the best people to talk to right now, as far as that goes.
okay,
It's not all done. It's just not all finished. We're working with those same people right now. They're the guys on GitHub. Look up the Marconi sidechain in the IOHK GitHub and start reaching those guys. They're super helpful. Have zero issues. But we're waiting for Chang, right? We need Chang hard fork for some of the stuff. So as long as we're all like tempered on our expectations of what's coming, is what it is. But that's, whether or not that's completely open knowledge right now or not, I don't know. But it's all public, it's all open source knowledge because it's all in the GitHub. And those folks that are working that area are pretty much your best bet for what's happening and where we're going in that direction.
cool. Thanks, Lloyd. Thanks, Spectrum. And maybe Spectrum will be the second partner chain launched on Cardano. Who knows? Could be. Could be. Those guys are building like crazy. Beautiful work you've done over there, Spectrum. Much appreciated. Let's see. We got Ed and stuff. Ed, what you got, buddy? Oh, is it still running? Ed, you still there? Spectrum,
I'm here.
Lloyd
I'm here.
did Lloyd help
I'm
with your
here.
question? Okay, all right.
I didn't unmute. No, I was going to ask you about something you're doing tomorrow. We just had a big launch day with Genius Yield, which was a pretty big deal. I know you're doing a chat with Lars tomorrow, I believe, right? And they're kind of pioneering. He's going to discuss how to do like full decentralized, kind of order book dexes, how we can kind of move to that kind of standard, how it's done. That's been a pretty big launch for the ecosystem. It's kind of a first. So I was just curious about that whole talk you're going to have tomorrow.
Oh yeah, so we're going to have 3 phases over a period of 45 minutes. The first chunk we're going to cover how the automated market makers work. It's going to be in a webinar, so it's in a Zoom webinar, and then we're just going to go through piece by piece about the main parts that Genius Yield is releasing at first. It seems like it could be basic stuff for advanced users, but there is some new interesting things. Like, for example, if there is an order on an order book, so it's an order book instead of an AMM, and let's say there's an order book that says there's 1 million Spectrum that's available for 500,000 ADA, and it's one order placed by one person, one entity, right? And you want to buy a piece of it. So you can go in there and say, well, I don't want the whole bag of 1 million. I like that order. It's a very competitive rate. It's better than the one that's asking for 600,000 ADA for 1 million Spectrum, for example. So you can place a smaller order against that order, and then the smart order routers will resolve it and get you what you're looking for. So it's kind of like halfway between an AMM and
You can kind of do partial
order
order fills and things like that.
Yeah, partial fills.
And have like total control. I like the fact that it's all open source. I like that approach. It's kind of with the Cardano ethos. I really like that they opened that for everybody to kind of contribute. So that's pretty exciting.
Yep. Yeah. And at the end of the 45-minute session, it might go on up to an hour, but I think the current plan is 45 minutes. There'll be a quiz, and the top 10 people that get 100% the fastest, or the top 10 scoring people in the least amount of time, they'll each win a certain amount of Gen's tokens, which right now is they got a pretty good price on them. So yeah, if you stay all the way to the end and you listen closely, you can take a little quiz at the end and try to win some tokens.
Cool.
Yeah, and we did a test on the quiz yesterday using it worked pretty neat. So Mina, I got to give her a shout out over at the Emergo Academy. She does really nice work, and I said, how's this going to work? And she made me a little practice test quiz, and we ran through it, and works pretty neat. I got to listen to that Twitter space. I wasn't able to dial into it today, and I'm like, okay, what'd they cover today? So we know what we covered when we cover tomorrow.
Oh, the recent one with Lars and friends?
Yeah, the one from about 3 hours ago, 4 hours ago.
Yeah, you should probably do a little homework. Yeah. But it's exciting. I mean, it's a big DEX launch. We've had a bunch of them. It's a hell of a time for the ecosystem. I mean, it just happened today. It's great.
Yep, wild stuff, wild stuff. And that Rosenbridge is coming up too. Ooh, that's going to be lit.
Yep, for sure.
Much excitement happening in the space. Everything's growing and doing amazing things for us all. But on that note, we're also 2 hours into this space.
Yeah. My dogs need a walk. Time to wrap it up. With that said, with dogs needing a walk, Hosky,
Let's go.
You'll be our last guy, and we're going to wrap it up.
Let's go, Rick. You're taking me for a walk.
Okay, let's go get tacos.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thanks, Rick, for hosting this space and getting them in here and bringing us all up to ask questions and things. And, everybody who's in the Cardano space, just want to take a moment to reflect on how far we have come. And I mean, we've got projects with energy drinks, like we have real world projects here. We've got World Mobile Token with cell phone networks. We've got ADA mail with email and web hosting. And it's like, we just really have to take a moment to appreciate all of the developments that are happening. And yes, there's more to come, but I just wanted to say that. And thanks for hosting this space. So with that, I'll say my farewells.
You bet. Thank you, #1 Hosky fan. And everybody, happy holidays. I hope you have a great new year. We're going for number one all day, every day, relentless. You never give up. You never quit. You keep pushing forward. You keep going. You keep driving. Never quit. On to 2024. Let's do it. Rock and roll. Rick
Woof.
out.